We have a map of Europe in 1914. You can see the red here. We have the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, and in blue, the Triple Entente, France, UK, and Russia. And Italy actually ends up joining on the side. We have Italy here, who actually ends up joining on the side of the Triple Entente in May 1915, because their alliance with Austria-Hungary was actually a bit awkward. Italy wanted some of the territory in Austria-Hungary, so Italy actually ends up joining on the side of the Entente. Italy joins on the side of the Entente in May 1915. But there were many long-term causes of World War One. The first of which was militarism. This is basically the arms race, particularly between Germany and the UK. There was a tense arms race. Who could get more guns? Another reason, a long-term reason, is the alliance system. There were alliances all over the place, so if one country got into war, heaps of different countries would end up getting into war. That's why the alliance system was important. Imperialism. This is basically the desire for an empire, their desire to build an empire. So different countries such as Austria-Hungary wanted to expand their empire, especially in Africa. Many European colonies would take over different areas of Africa in order to expand their empire. And we also have nationalism, which is basically the pride in one's own country. For example, Austria-Hungary had a lot of pride in their country. On the 28th of June 1914, we have the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who is the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. The assassination is actually one of many various attempts, and it was organized by the Black Hand in Serbia. So he was killed on the 28th of June 1914. Clearly, Austria-Hungary is not happy about this. Austria-Hungary is quite angry about this. So what happens is Austria-Hungary actually issues a harsh ultimatum to Serbia. The terms of the ultimatum are very harsh and unrealistic. Serbia tries their best, but their best was not enough. And so exactly 1 month later, on the 28th of July 1914, Austria-Hungary actually declares war on Serbia. They declare war on Serbia. And that marks the beginning of World War I, the 20th of July 1914. Germany, before they actually declared war on Serbia, Germany said, hey Austria-Hungary, we'll support you. No matter what you decide to do, if you want to declare war on Serbia, we'll have your back, we'll support you. So this is known as a blank check. That's known as a blank check, a message of support. So who is to blame for the beginning of World War I? Was it Austria-Hungary who was to blame? I mean, Austria-Hungary was pretty harsh. They brought Germany into the war with them. They ended up acting too slowly. I mean, it took them a month to end up declaring war. They did annex Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908, which was actually the reason why Gavrilo Princip assassinated the Archduke to the throne. And their ultimatum to Serbia was really harsh, so maybe that's why Austria-Hungary was to blame. But we also have Germany, who could be to blame. I mean, Germany, they're the one who sent the blank check, the message of support. They were building an arms race. They were stockpiling all their weapons. They were pretty keen to get into a war. They ended up invading Belgium via the Schlieffen Plan. And they also very quickly declared war on France after Russia actually began to mobilize to support. They wanted to support Serbia. They wanted to support Serbia because they were of Slavic descent. And once Russia mobilized, Germany basically just said, okay, Russia, we're going to declare war on you. And hey, France, you're an ally of Russia, so we're going to declare war on you too. So maybe that's why Germany was to blame. Then you could also say, hey, Serbia here, maybe Serbia's to blame. Serbia over here, maybe it's Serbia's fault, because, you know, they were the ones who had the Black Hand, who had the role in the assassination. But then you could say Russia's to blame because, hey, they mobilized. They tried to help Serbia. So maybe Russia's to blame. If we look at a basic timeline of World War One, we have the 8th, the 4th of August 1914, which was when the UK actually said, okay, Germany, you invaded Belgium. We have a peace treaty with Belgium. You're not allowed to do that, so we are going to declare war on you. So UK actually declares war on Germany. UK declares war on Germany in 1914. And as I said, in May 1915, Italy decides to join the Triple Entente in May 1915. In 1917, this is particularly significant. In April 1917, the USA actually joins World War One for reasons we won't have to look at for the moment, but it's basically because of unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking of the Lusitania, Zimmerman's telegram, all that good stuff. In October 1917, I should do this in a more appropriate color. Let's say, let me do it in red. In October 1917, we have the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution, or the Bolshevik Revolution. And this was basically when Russia decided to become a communist nation. So Russia is now communist under Lenin. Reasons you don't really need to know why Russia decided to become a communist nation. Basically, the people were suspicious and they were fed up with the empire. They were fed up with the emperors. But Russia actually decides to become a communist nation. So we have the Russian Revolution in October 1917. And in March 1918, let me do this in this color. Well, let me do it in orange. In March 1918, Germany and Russia decide to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which means Russia actually backs out of the war. Russia decides to back out of the war. So we have the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And this is a pretty harsh treaty. I mean, Russia lost 26 million people. 26 million people. I mean, Germany actually ends up capturing all of this land. I'll show you right here. Let me get the right color. Germany actually ends up capturing a whole bunch of Russian land. Germany annexes a whole bunch of Russian land via Brest-Litovsk. So Russia loses 26 million people. They also lose 27% of their farmland, 26% of their railway lines. They lose 74%. They lose 74% of their iron ore and coal reserves. And it's also the start of the German Spring Offensive on the Western Front. But we have August 1918, which is the start of the Allied offensive on the Western Front. So they actually begin to push back into Germany, and we have the 10th of the 11th, 1918. So what's that? The 10th of November 1918, which is when Kaiser Wilhelm II actually decides to abdicate. And on the 11th of November, the day after, on the 11th of November, we have the armistice. On the 11th of November 1918, we have the armistice, which means World War I is actually brought to an end, thankfully. And this brings us into our next topic, and this document is extremely important because it ended the war between the Allied powers and Germany, and it shaped everything else that happened after World War I, and that is the Treaty of Versailles. That is the Treaty of Versailles. So let me find some space here. The treaty So the Treaty of Versailles is what ended the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers, and it is arguably the most important of all the peace treaties that basically triggered World War II as well, and it sparked almost all of the events, all of the major and important events after World War One. And it was signed exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So we know that he was assassinated on the 28th of June. We know he was assassinated on the 28th of June 1914. So exactly 5 years later, we have the Treaty of Versailles signed on the 28th of June. On the 28th of June, 1919. So that is when the Treaty of Versailles was actually signed. And we have to look at the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. An easy way to remember the terms is through the acronym. I guess it's really a mnemonic. Rich woman make terrible windows. And that basically stands for, if we translate each one, reparations. W is war guilt. M is military restrictions. T is territorial losses. W was weaponry limitations. So if we look at the reparations, we see that Germany was actually forced to pay for the war $6.6 billion. $6.6 billion in reparations. Germany wouldn't have finished paying this bill until 1984, theoretically. If we look at war guilt, this clause was simple, but it was seen as extremely harsh by the Germans, because the war guilt was also known as Article 231, and it basically meant Germany had to accept responsibility for the war. And I guess, hey, you could blame Germany for starting the war. I mean, they're the ones who declared war on France. They're the ones who declared war on Russia. They're the ones who issued the harsh ultimatum. They didn't issue the harsh ultimatum. They're the ones who issued the blank check, the message of support, and they also invaded Belgium via the Schlieffen Plan. So hey, maybe there was an argument that war guilt wasn't so bad, but then again, you could blame other nations like Austria-Hungary for declaring war on Serbia, Russia for mobilizing, Serbia for being involved in the Black Hand. So there are arguments against this. You can see why the Germans could have been quite upset about this. With the military restrictions, so Germany had to decrease the size of their army to 100,000. So this left Germany pretty angry. They found pride in their army, and reducing it to 100,000, that was basically nothing. So that was quite a major restriction. No more conscription either. No more conscription. So soldiers had to actually be volunteered. So conscription was no longer allowed. Territorial losses, these were quite major actually. Many territorial losses were put into place. We can look at some of them. There were many of them. The Rhineland, which was theirs, had to become a demilitarized zone. Alsace-Lorraine, which they had gained after Prussia won the Franco-Prussian War. So France wanted that back, so that went back to France. As I said, Rhineland demilitarized. Denmark, Northern Schleswig went to Denmark after a vote or a plebiscite. The union between Austria-Hungary and Germany was forbidden. The Saarland was to be run by the League of Nations, and then a plebiscite to be held there after 15 years. We have West Prussia and Posen, which went to Poland. Upper Silesia went to Poland. Danzig, which is a free city, was to be run by the League of Nations, and that would give Poland a seaport. We have many territorial changes and losses which affected Germany. If we look at the weaponry limitations, we have many things. 6 battleships. 6 battleships. That was only one of the things. There were also many other things as well. No submarine or U-boats, things like that. Another term of the Treaty of Versailles was the League of Nations was to be set up. The League of Nations, which will crop up later. The League of Nations. And that was to be set up as an international police force to prevent another war. And Germany was not invited until it could prove itself that it was a peace-loving country. So there we go. They're the main things you need to know about the Treaty of Versailles. And the next thing we should look at is actually something called Wilson's 14 points. And I need to find some space to write this. Wilson's 14 points. I'm not going to list all of them because they don't matter. But I'll go through them quickly. The first was open covenants of peace openly arrived at. The second was the freedom of the seas. So open covenants of peace means no secret peace treaties. Freedom of the seas, so no more economic blockades or barriers. Third, the removal of all barriers, all economic barriers. Fourth, the reduction of national armaments to the lowest point consistent with domestic safety. So get rid of all your arms. You need to disarm, basically. The fifth was impartial adjustment of all colonial claims. Sixth, the evacuation of Russian territory, so the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was nullified. 7, the evacuation and restoration of Belgium. 8, the liberation of France and return of Alsace-Lorraine to France. 9 was the readjustment of frontiers of Italy to conform to clearly recognizable lines of nationality, so basically give Italy back to how it was. 10th was the peoples of Austria-Hungary should be accorded the freest opportunity of autonomous development. 11, evacuation and occupation forces from Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. Serbia should be accorded free and secure access to the sea. So get out of Serbia. 12, we have the autonomous development for the non-Turkish peoples of the Ottoman Empire, free passage of the Dardanelles to ships and commerce of all nations. 13, an independent Poland to be established with free and secure access to the sea, so that was put into place. And finally, 14, a general association of nations to be formed to guarantee its members' political independence and territorial integrity. So basically, 1 to 5 is all just economic alterations. You know, the freedom of the seas, open covenants of peace, reduction of national armaments, adjustment of colonial claims. Those are all just economic alterations. 6 to 13 were just liberations of territories. So evacuation of Russia, restoration of Belgium, return of Alsace-Lorraine, Austria-Hungary, Serbia, blah, blah, blah. And 14 was basically the League of Nations. So a general association of nations to be formed. That was basically the League of Nations. So we have economic alterations, liberations of territory, and the League of Nations. The League of Nations was just an attempt to reduce the possibility of a future war. So it studied the causes of World War One. Well, basically 14 points studied the causes of World War One and it attempted to stop another war from occurring. It pursued Wilson's idea of self-determination, so each country should have the right to govern itself and choose its own future. And the creation of the League of Nations was on a basis of collective security, so nations would protect each other in the event of one attacking another, so they'd stand up for each other. So the main points which I think are worthy of remembering turns out that it's important to remember at least five of Wilson's 14 points. So let's take a look at five of what I think are the most important ones. And the first of which is no secret agreements. No more secret agreements. Zimmerman's telegram, things like that. No more secret agreements. Freedom of the seas. So get all your ships out of the seas. So freedom of the seas. The creation of League of Nations. That was pretty obvious. Creation of League of Nations. We also have the reduction of national armaments, so disarmament. Get rid of all your weapons. They're only going to be used in bad ways. Fifth, the liberation of France. Liberate France. And return Alsace-Lorraine. Liberate France. Return Alsace-Lorraine, which was lost, which was taken by German Empire in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War. So return Alsace-Lorraine. They want it back. Give it back to them. That should have an E on it. Alright. So let's look at the Prime Minister of France at the time. The Prime Minister of France. He was Georges Clemenceau. He was Georges Clemenceau. And he wanted to cripple Germany so it could not attack again. So cripple Germany. France had obviously suffered a lot in World War One, so they wanted to cripple Germany. He found Wilson hard to work with. He found Wilson difficult because Wilson obviously didn't have to deal with as many casualties. They joined the war later. They joined the war in 1917. So clearly, there would have been some disputes. The USA joined the war in April 1917, so there would have been some disputes because France sacrificed a lot more than the US, and France was right next to the US, so he found Wilson quite difficult to work with. He did agree with Wilson's aim for fair and lasting peace, however. He wanted peace. He wanted lasting peace. Everyone wanted lasting peace. But unfortunately that didn't end up happening because we know World War II happened, but anyway. He knew he would be forced to compromise on some issues. He would be forced to compromise. Forced to compromise. So I think it's important to look at each leader of each country. So if we look at the UK, if we look at the United Kingdom, we have David Lloyd George. David Lloyd George. Now, he agreed the Germans should be punished. He wanted to punish Germany, but he didn't want to do it too harshly because he wanted to avoid a future war. So we wanted to punish Germany, but not as much as France. So punish Germany, but not too harshly, because he didn't want Germany to seek revenge in the future, but not too harshly. Alright. He wanted Germany to lose its navy. He wanted Germany to lose its navy and colonies because they threatened the British Empire. So lose navy and colonies. Obviously, British Empire wanted to expand. Germany's navy and colonies threatened the British Empire. So he wanted Germany to lose their navy and colonies. Now, he viewed Wilson as a missionary who came to Paris to rescue the European savages with lectures. He won the 1918 election by promising to make Germany pay. Won 1918 election by promising to make Germany pay. But he realized the dangers of this, so had to find a balance between balancing pressures at home, what the people wanted, and his desire to not leave Germany wanting revenge. Another reason he didn't want to cripple Germany too much is because he wanted to trade with Germany. Germany was a major economic power that he wanted to trade with, so he wanted to trade with Germany. And he also wanted to use Germany to stop the spread of communism. So obviously the Bolshevik Revolution was in 1917. It was in October 1917. That's when the Bolshevik Revolution was, and obviously communism was spreading. Germany would stop a spread. A strong Germany would stop a spread to this communism. And then finally we have the views of the USA. The views of the USA. So I'm going to do him in, I think, purple. So USA with Woodrow Wilson. So Wilson didn't want to be too harsh on Germany because he knew they might seek revenge in the future, so not too harsh. So similar view to David Lloyd George, but even less harsh. He wanted to be even less harsh. He wanted to strengthen democracy in defeated countries so that their leaders wouldn't want to start another war. So strengthen democracy. The ideas of self-determination, each country having the right to elect its own leaders and determine its own fate. So to strengthen democracy, self-determination. He wanted to use his 14 points to prevent another war. Liberation, economic liberation, disarmament, things like that. He believed they would prevent another war. So the 14 points stop war from occurring again. So self-determination. Self-determination. The League of Nations. All that stuff. We also have, he wanted international cooperation. So he wanted international cooperation by the League of Nations. So he wanted international cooperation. And one thing to note is that the war had been economically profitable for USA. So the war was economically profitable for the USA. So that is one thing to note. So the USA basically was the guy who wanted basically UK, France, and Italy to settle down, think about what they're doing, and try and promote peace, really. So how's a Paris Peace Conference organized? That's a good question. How's a Paris Peace Conference organized? I'm going to find some space to do it, hopefully. Here's some space. So how is a Paris Peace Conference organized? Paris Peace Conference. So it took place in the Palace of Versailles. It lasted 12 months. So, lasted 12 months. 12 months. 32 nations were represented. So 32 nations. That's quite a significant amount. No one from the defeated nations was represented. Defeated nations were not represented. That includes Germany, Austria, Hungary, all those nations, Bulgaria, they were not represented. 5 treaties were drawn up, 1 for each of the defeated powers. 5 treaties were drawn up, 1 for each of the defeated powers. The big 3, so Clemenceau, Wilson, and Lloyd George, met 140 times. So the big 3, that should be an R, met 140 times. That is a significant amount of times. The big 4, if you add the big 4, you have Vittorio Orlando, who was basically the Prime Minister of Italy, Vittorio Orlando. The Council of 10 with 2 members from UK, USA, France, Italy, and Japan. So that's interesting. Over 50 commissions were set up to give advice on topics such as prisoners of war and war guilt. So, so 50 commissions were set up. 50 commissions were set up to give advice on topics such as prisoners of war and war guilt. So 50 commissions set up to give advice. So this was no joke. I mean, the 50 commissions were all experts. So they did arrive at an informed conclusion on how the Treaty of Versailles should be set up, and they did conclude that Germany was responsible via Article 231. Let's have a look at some historians' views on the Treaty of Versailles. One historian said that compared to the treaties with Germany that Germany had imposed on defeated Russia and Romania in 1918, the Treaty of Versailles was quite moderate. The Treaty of Versailles was not excessively harsh on Germany either territorially or economically. So basically, Clemenceau wanted to split Germany into smaller states and take far more land away, and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was much more harsher than Versailles in some historians' views. So some people say the Treaty of Versailles was justified. So another historian said that severe as the treaty may seem to many Germans, it should be remembered that if Germany might have fared much worse if Clemenceau had had his way. So this resembles the fact that Clemenceau wanted to split up Germany into even smaller states, and Clemenceau also wanted even harsher reparations. Another historian said, basically, I think one can say that the Treaty of Versailles was harsh but understandable. The Allied governments were put under the pressure of their own public, which demanded the Germans to pay for it all. So this shows the British public wanted to make Germany pay. Lloyd George was re-elected under this. So make Germany pay. He was re-elected under that in 1918. The democracy of the Allied powers meant that the leaders had to listen to the people and make the treaty at least somewhat harsh. Another historian said that the Germans did have some cause for complaint. However, Germany was still the strongest and most dominant power in Europe economically. So that was the unwise thing about Versailles, was that it annoyed the Germans, yet did not render them weak enough to not retaliate. So this showed Hitler was appointed as German Chancellor in 1933, and the Nazi government came to power, and World War II occurred. So another historian said what they all failed to take into account was that in order for a plan, a treaty, or an arrangement to be successful, everybody has to have the same goal. So this resembles the fact that each country wanted different things out of Versailles. The 14 points differed from the Treaty of Versailles. A compromise had to be made. We have Clemenceau wanted to be extremely harsh, David Lloyd George less harsh, and even Wilson even less harsh. The public opinion also mattered because it sometimes differed from what the big three wanted. So basically, in order for an arrangement to be successful, everybody has to have the same goals. That clearly was not true in this case. The criminal madness of this peace will drain Germany's national lifeblood. It is a shameless blow in the face of common sense. It is inflicting the deepest wounds on us Germans as our world lies in wreckage about us. That was from one historian. A speech made by a German MP in the Reichstag in 1919. This shows this is evidence for this is via the hyperinflation crisis in 1922 to 1923, with the $6.6 billion in reparations to national terror groups who assassinate 356 government politicians. So it is quite significant. The madness that the Treaty of Versailles caused. The Great War was supposed to be the war to end all wars. The treaty was the peace to end all peace. So the League of Nations was supposed to prevent another war. Disarmament was supposed to prevent another war. Collective security was supposed to prevent another war. This whole treaty was meant to prevent another war. However, World War II ended up occurring. So it didn't really work, did it? It was basically due to Hitler and his foreign policy aims. Failure of the League, we can look into that later. So if we move forward, What losses of territory was imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles? So, what losses of territory? Well, I think we went over that earlier. Germany lost all of its colonies. It lost Alsace-Lorraine to France. It lost northern Schleswig, given to Denmark, West Prussia and Posen, and Upper Silesia to Poland. Let's take a look at the other peace treaties. I think it's important to have a look at some of the other peace treaties. So let me actually zoom out a bit. As you can see, we've done a fair amount. Let me clear everything and fill everything in with black. So let's have a look at some of the other peace treaties. So, other peace treaties which were organized at the Paris Peace Conference. Other peace treaties. So if we look at the Treaty of Saint-Germain, and this was with Austria, which was, Austria-Hungary was actually split up after when Treaty of Versailles was signed. So the Treaty of Saint-Germain with Austria. We also have the Treaty of New Orleans with Bulgaria. Treaty of New Orleans. That was with Bulgaria. And we also have the Treaty of Trianon. That was with Hungary. Treaty of Trianon was with Hungary. And finally, we have the Treaty of Sèvres. Let me do this in a green color. The Treaty of Sèvres. And that was with Turkey in 1920. So that was with Turkey in 1920. And it actually changed, and we'll look at that. But first, let's take a look at the Treaty of Saint-Germain. So with Austria. This limited Austria's army to 30,000 men. 30,000 men. It also meant it couldn't unite with Germany. So no Anschluss with Germany. It was the same in Versailles, no Anschluss with Austria. But here for Austria, there's no Anschluss with Germany. So that was significant. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was broken, so Austria-Hungary was broken up. That was in the Treaty of Saint-Germain. So Austria-Hungary was broken up via the Treaty of Saint-Germain. It was broken up into Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, and also clearly Austria and Hungary. And so Austria, as a result of Saint-Germain, suffered severe economic problems. Suffered severe economic problems. So that was significant. If we look at the Treaty of New Orleans with Bulgaria, Bulgaria lost land to Greece. It lost land to Greece, which was an allied power. Its army was limited to 20,000. So even less than Austria. Army limited to 20,000. It was forced to pay 10 million in reparations. So 10 million reparations. That's a lot less than Germany's 6.6 billion. That's 6,600 million. This is a lot less than that. That's less than 1/100th of what Germany was forced to pay. So a note was that it was treated less harshly than Germany and the other allies. It was treated less harshly than the other members of the Triple Alliance, so treated less harshly. Treated less harshly. Oh, it was treated less harshly than Germany's other allies, okay. So Trianon, Hungary lost territory to Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. So Hungary lost territory to Romania. So the Treaty of Trianon with Hungary lost territory to Romania, Czechoslovakia, which was just above it, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. And it was due to pay some reparations, but the economy was so weak that it never did. Due to pay reparations, but its economy was so weak, it never did. So it never did. And finally, with the Treaty of Sevres, which was originally in 1920, but it was actually alterations were actually made to it. Let's have a look at that right now. So let's start with Turkey. So Turkey lost land. It actually lost land to Bulgaria. So this land actually went to Bulgaria. Lost land to Bulgaria. Some land also went to Italy. And some land also went to Greece, which was an allied power. Much of its empire was lost. Much of the Ottoman Empire was lost to including Tunisia. So empire lost, including Tunisia, which is an African country these days. So including Tunisia and Morocco. So that is also an African country. Its armed forces were limited to 50,000. So 50,000 armed forces, 50,000 men. Its navy was also strictly limited, and it had no air force at all. Navy limited, and no air force. So this is pretty harsh, actually. So it was actually altered to the Treaty of Lausanne. It was actually changed to the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. And this, why was it changed? Well, it was because why was it renegotiated? Well, it was because it was seen as too harsh by the Turkish nationalists, led by Kemal, especially Smyrna to Greece. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It led to the Turkish overthrow of the Ottoman Sultan, and the Treaty of Lausanne was more generous. So it was too hard. It was seen as too harsh by Turkish nationalists, and it led to the Turkish overthrow of the Ottoman Sultan. So the Allies said, "Hey, we'll impose a Treaty of Lausanne, which is a bit more generous." So what this did is it confirmed its loss of the Middle East territories. Confirmed Middle East territory losses. Middle East losses. It received back most of its European territory. So all the territory it lost to Bulgaria, Italy, and Greece, it received back most European territory. Received back most European territory. The Dardanelles Strait was returned to Turkish control. So the Dardanelles Strait was returned. Now the Dardanelles Strait is actually significant. I believe it connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea, if I'm right. So the Dardanelles Strait, let me quickly look. Dardanelles Strait. Return to Turkey. It's a narrow strait internationally. Forms part of the continental, yeah. I think it connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. Yeah. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, the Dardanelles Strait connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. It's not to be confused with this. It's a natural strait. It's not to be confused with the Suez Canal, which connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. That's near Egypt. So don't confuse it with that. This is a Dardanelles Strait, which connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. So that was returned back to Turkish control under Lausanne in 1923. And restrictions and reparations were removed. So military, this is quite significant. Military restrictions and reparations were removed. They were actually removed. So that is a lot less harsh. Okay, so what's next? We can take a look at some different questions. For example, why did Lloyd George believe that a moderate peace settlement with Germany was in British interests? Well, George realized that Britain needed Europe to recover economically. Germany had been Britain's most important customer prior to 1914. If Germany lost the Rhineland, it would not be rich enough to buy British goods. High reparation figures would check German economic recovery. A weak Germany would not be a barrier to communism. Lloyd George did not want France becoming too powerful, and therefore needed a reasonably strong Germany to keep it in check. So you explain those reasons. You got to explain 2 reasons in detail for a Part B question. Why were Wilson's expectations of the peace settlement of 1919 to 1920 different from those of Clemenceau? Well, we can say France had made greater sacrifice during the war than the USA, and Clemenceau realized there was a national desire for revenge against Germany. Wilson took a more detached view of the peace proceedings because America had only been in the war for just over a year. They joined in April 1917. No American territory had been invaded, and casualties were relatively light compared to French. You can also say Clemenceau wanted security for France in the future. France had been invaded for a second time in 50 years. France and Clemenceau shared a border. France and Germany shared a border. Clemenceau wanted to weaken Germany's armed forces and economy. Wilson hoped to produce fair and lasting peace. Wilson wanted the League of Nations. He wanted those 14 points implemented. His approach was based on ideals and high principles, and Clemenceau was interested in self-interest. Alright, so those are some questions answered. Did the Big Three get everything they wanted from Versailles? Did the Big Three get what they wanted? Get what? I should really rewrite that. Did they get what they wanted from Versailles? So we can look at each character and reasons why they were happy and unhappy. So if we look at Clemenceau, we can look at Clemenceau and see why he was happy and unhappy. Happy and unhappy. We could look at Wilson. Woodrow Wilson instead of George's Clemenceau, and we can look at why he was happy and why he was unhappy. Why was he happy and why was he unhappy? And we can also look at Lloyd George. I'm going to do him in purple. So David Lloyd George. And we can look at some reasons why he was happy and why he was unhappy. So if we look at Clemenceau, what are some reasons why he was happy? Well, he was happy because of Article 231, the War Guilt Clause. Germany had to accept responsibility for the First World War. That was in the Treaty of Versailles. So they were happy about that. They got Alsace-Lorraine back. They lost this in the Franco-Prussian War in 1871. They got it back, Alsace-Lorraine. They wanted it back, they got it back. That was one of the terms of Versailles. Poland was created. Poland was created to keep Germany in check, so it was right next to Germany. Poland was created, so that would help. Poland would help protect France in the event of war. Why was France unhappy? What are some things Clemenceau was upset about? Well, Germany was not split into smaller countries. Um, so Germany not split into smaller states. So Germany not split. Germany not split. The Rhineland was only demilitarized, not taken away. So Rhineland not taken away. It was still part of Germany. It was only demilitarized. So Rhineland not taken away. So it was demilitarized, but it was still part of Germany. So Clemenceau was not happy because he wanted the Rhineland to actually be taken away, but it wasn't. It was only demilitarized. All right. German resources only to be used by France for 15 years. So in the Saarland, well, German resources only to be used by France for 15 years. So that was interesting. Yeah, so German resources were only to be used by France for 15 years. German resources, only 15 years. Only 15 years. The Saarland was not given to France, so the Saarland was actually given to the League of Nations for 15 years. Then a plebiscite would be held. So Saarland, League of Nations, not given to France. Clemenceau would have wanted the Saarland to actually go to France, and Danzig was given to the League of Nations instead of Poland. So Danzig was given to the League of Nations instead of Poland. Clemenceau would have preferred that Danzig goes to Poland to increase Poland's strength to make Germany weaker. So that's why he was unhappy with that. Danzig was given to League of Nations instead of Poland. Okay, what are some reasons Wilson was happy? Well, he was happy that the League of Nations was created. The League of Nations was one of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and it was created. So he was happy about that. Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia were created. So new states, Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia. So that this comes under his idea of self-determination. The country's ability of democracy to determine their own path, to elect their own leaders and determine their own future. So new states such as Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia were created. The war was profitable. It's profitable for the USA. So profit. The USA made money from the war. Another reason is because the Baltic states were also created, which were given self-determination. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, they were created. Lithuania's capital is Vilna. That comes up in the League of Nations. Latvia, Riga, and Estonia, Tallinn. Unhappy. What are some of the reasons Wilson was unhappy? Well, Armenia was not given self-determination. Armenia, no self-determination. This is against his idea of self-determination. Armenia, no self-determination. No general disarmament. No general disarmament. This was important. Disarmament was one of his 14 points. There was no general disarmament. It only applied to Germany. So Germany was disarmed via the Treaty of Versailles. You know, their 100,000 men, but no one else disarmed. So there was no general disarmament. Emphasis on the word general. It only applied to Germany. So there was no greater independence for colonies. So colonies of Germany, there was no greater independence for those colonies. Mandates were created. So mandates were created, which meant empires were expanded. Empires expanded. I should write that no greater independence for colonies, such as colonies of British Empire weren't given any greater independence. So colonies, no independence. Can't really fit everything here. Independence. So mandates created, which means empires were expanded. This is just imperialism right there. The USA was obviously not. It was a republic. It didn't like imperialism. So empires being expanded, that was not good in Wilson's eyes. There was no ban on secret treaties. No ban on secret treaties. So no open covenants of peace. No ban on, I should say. No ban on secret treaties. No ban on secret treaties. Freedom of the seas was abandoned. So freedom of the seas abandoned. That was also one of his. So the freedom of the seas abandoned. That was also one of his 15 points. That's out the window. And all the exceptions to his ideas of self-determination. That's what he was unhappy about. So Lloyd George, what are some of the reasons Lloyd George was happy? Well, the naval restrictions on Germany. So Germany had intense naval restrictions, only 6 battleships. Britain wanted their navy to be the best. So naval restrictions on Germany was a good thing. They gained some of Germany's empires. So they gained some of Germany's empires. Which means they got to expand their own empire. It fitted with their ideas of imperialism, expand the British Empire. So they gained some of Germany's empire. What is this? There were harsh reparations on Germany. I guess they weren't particularly happy about this because of they didn't want Germany to become economically unprofitable because they wanted to still trade with Germany. But there are arguments that harsh reparations would have been a good thing, but I think that is actually more of an argument for Clemenceau. So harsh reparations is more of an argument for Clemenceau, I would say. Harsh reparations. Now that I think about it, harsh reparations fits more with Clemenceau. It fits more with Clemenceau's idea. And all the military restrictions as well. So the military restrictions on Germany. So really, just for Lloyd George, we have the naval restrictions, gaining some of Germany's empire. What are some of the reasons he's unhappy? Well, he can no longer trade with Germany because Germany's weak now because of the reparations. So he can't trade with Germany. So they were previously good trading partners, but not anymore. The Treaty of Versailles was too harsh on Germany, so Britain feared revenge. Britain feared revenge from Germany. Britain feared German revenge. This was a serious issue. Britain did not want France to be too dominant in Europe. So France, so now that Germany's weak, France is becoming more powerful. So how can I word this? So one of the reasons he was unhappy was that France is becoming more dominant as a result of the harsh terms. But some people argue that Germany was still one of the most dominant powers in Europe. But for Lloyd George, he didn't want France to become too dominant. He preferred a balance of power between France and Germany. So preferred a balance of power. So ostensibly he preferred a balance of power. Let's have a look at why the big three didn't get what they wanted from Versailles. So why didn't the big three get everything they wanted? Why didn't the big three get all they wanted from Versailles? Alright, so let's have a look at that. The first reason was there was too much disagreement. Obviously, it's a bit obvious, but let me go into more detail into that issue. So I'll dive into deeper detail here. So France wanted to be harsher on Germany than Britain because obviously the amount of casualties France suffered. But then the USA wanted to be even less harsh because they only joined in April 1917. They wanted to be even less harsh than Britain. So a compromise had to be made. Compromise had to be made. Had to be made. You know, each suffered a different number of casualties, so public opinion differed. So different casualties equals different casualties equals different public opinion. So obviously the French public was very spiteful towards Germany, British public still, but not as much as French, and the US not quite so much. So different public opinion. So each suffered different levels of casualties. So there was disagreement. A compromise had to be made. Each of the big three had different aims. So each had different aims. So each had differing aims. So if we look at the UK wanted an economically prosperous Germany. The UK wanted an economically prosperous Germany. However, that didn't work out due to the 6.6 billion in reparations, which crippled Germany's economy. So UK wanted an economically prosperous Germany to improve trade and prevent the spread of communism. To improve trade, and prevent spread of communism. So this is a big one. I think each of different aims, and prevent communism spreading, and also the balance of power argument. And this starkly contrasts with Clemenceau's aim, which was with France's aims, which were instead to greatly punish Germany for the damage done to France and wanted reparations to pay for this damage. So greatly punish Germany for damage via reparations, and these reparations would obviously cripple the German economy. Which is exactly what the British didn't want, which is exactly what the UK didn't want for these reasons. So, but France wanted to greatly punish Germany for damage via reparations, which would cripple the German economy. So this is significant. One of the major reasons the big three didn't get what they wanted is because they had differing aims. The UK wanted a prosperous Germany, however the French wanted to damage Germany completely. They wanted to damage Germany completely. The role of public opinion mattered as well. So the role of public opinion. Role of public opinion. So clearly we have the UK public wanted revenge because 750,000 British were killed. 750,000 British killed. So clearly the UK public wanted revenge, but Lloyd George, he wanted an economically prosperous Germany for the reasons we've seen, for trade, stopping communism. This public opinion, so the British public opinion differed with Lloyd George. It kind of conflicted with Lloyd George's aims. So it conflicted with Lloyd George's aims of a prosperous Germany. So he had to try and find a balance. That made it difficult for him to get what he wanted from Versailles. Um, the complexity of the treaty. So, we have the complexity of the treaty. Complexity of treaty. Clearly, we have self-determination in Germany. Wilson accepted German self-determination. I'll go into this in more detail. So, as I said, we also have the vast complexity of the treaty. So, Wilson wanted self-determination. However, you know, some of Germany's states weren't given self-determination. For example, the Polish corridor and Danzig, they were taken over by the League of Nations, so there was no self-determination for some states. So the complexity of the treaty is also something which caused the Big Three to not get everything they wanted. So Wilson wanted self-determination, but Germany did need to be punished. But some German states would inevitably fail to get that. Didn't get it. So that one is another reason. And another reason is that the Big Three didn't get all they wanted is because there were other claimants at the Paris Peace Conference. So other claimants. Other claimants. For example, Italy claimed territory in Yugoslavia and an empire in Africa. Japan had claimed German territory in China. So there were other claimants at the peace conference. So Italy claimed territory in Yugoslavia and an empire in Africa, and Japan claimed German territory in China. So that's another reason why the Big Three didn't get all they wanted, especially via self-determination. So this is one of the reasons we couldn't have self-determination, because there are other claimants. So this just comes under the complexity of the treaty. So there's differing views, there's opposing conflicts, conflicts in terms, which can cause turmoil due to its complexity. So the other claimants conflict with self-determination. Other claimants of territory, it really conflicts. Other claimants of territory really conflicts with self-determination, with Wilson's ideas of self-determination, which were put into place through, the creation of Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and the Baltic states. However, it didn't work through the other claimants, and this is basically just due to the treaty's complexity. Okay, we have the German reaction to the treaty. Let's have a look at that. Let's take a look at the German reaction to the treaty. See if I can find some space somewhere. Alright. So how was the German reaction to the treaty? The German reaction to Versailles. Alright, so the Germans particularly didn't like the military restrictions, military restrictions. They were unhappy with that. We have 100,000, which is small, and only applied to defeated powers. So the 100,000 was a symbol of German pride. The army was a symbol of German pride, so to restrict it to 100,000, they didn't like that. So they were unhappy about that. The territorial losses were significant. We've seen those, demilitarization of the Rhineland, Danzig, West Prussia and Posen, Northern Schleswig, the Saarland given to the League of Nations for 15 years. all that stuff. A lot of territorial losses were imposed. The war guilt, Article 231. They felt that Germany was actually dictated into signing it. It was a diktat. They were dictated into signing it. They didn't feel like they were responsible for the war. You know, we have those other states, Russia for mobilizing. We have all the reasons we discussed earlier. You know, Russia for mobilizing, Serbia for the Black Hand movement, Austria-Hungary for the harsh ultimatum. You could blame anybody really. Germany didn't feel like they were responsible. That's another reason they were unhappy. They were unhappy about all of these things. They wanted it to be based off the 14 points. They wanted Versailles to be based off of 14 points. To be based from Wilson's 14 points. Wilson's 14 points. However, this never happened. Why wasn't it based on this? There was no self-determination, so they were unhappy about that. There was no self-determination for the German losses like there were for the Baltic states, so no self-determination. Like, no self-determination for German losses like Baltic states. So the people in these states were just given over to other countries. So no self-determination like Baltic states. So no self-determination for German losses of territory. All those German people would be under new power. They weren't given the right to be part of Germany and determine their own fate. So no self-determination for the German losses of territory. Germany lost. They lost 10% of their land in Europe. So 10%, a tenth of their land, 10% of their European land. They weren't happy about that. All of its overseas colonies. All overseas colonies. So I guess we're not really looking at reactions. We're just looking further into what happened. All overseas colonies. 12.5% of its population. So about an eighth of its population. That's quite a lot, to be honest. An eighth of its population. I need to disable this. So, an eighth of its population, and also 16% of its coal fields. 16% of its coal fields. And 50% of its iron and steel industry. Half of iron and steel industry. So that's significant. So the German people were generally rather unhappy. Alright. So let's answer some more Treaty of Versailles questions. Let me move over a bit. So, why were Wilson's expectations of the peace settlement of 1919 to 1920 different from those of Clemenceau? Well, as we can see, Lloyd George wanted an economically prosperous Germany. This would make trade much easier and be beneficial for the British economy itself. A harsh treaty would threaten the economic prosperity of Germany, ruling it out as a trading power. Lloyd George also feared that if the settlement was too harsh, Germany would seek revenge in the future. He also wanted Germany to stay relatively strong in order to stop the spread of communism, and he also wanted a balance of power. France had made greater sacrifices. Oh yeah, so we're answering this next question, which was why were Wilson's expectations of the peace settlement of 1919 to 1920 different than those of Clemenceau? Well, France had made greater sacrifices with far more casualties and suffered far more resources damage than the United States, who had entered in April 1917. Thus, France wanted a harsher treaty than Germany, and France wanted a harsher treaty than the US. So the US was also considerably farther away from Germany than France. France was right next to it. France borders Germany, so they would have a different perspective with regards to that. So if we look overall at whether the Treaty of Versailles was fair or not fair, so Treaty of Versailles, was it fair or unfair? So we can look at whether it was fair or unfair. Okay, so what are some reasons it was fair? Well, it was modest compared to Litovsk. It was modest compared to Litovsk, which Germany imposed on Russia. Litovsk took away much more land, much more population. France wanted even harsher terms. France wanted harsher terms. Wanted much harsher terms. So the Treaty of Versailles was in some regards fair compared to what France wanted. Harsher terms. Democracy. So it was fair because of democracy. They had to listen to the people. Leaders were just listening to the people. Leaders just listened to people. Listened to public opinion, which is what they needed to do because they were a democracy. So the leaders just listened to public opinion. Casualties. So given the high number of sacrifices each of these countries made, it was only fair that the Treaty of Versailles was somewhat harsh. So given casualties as a result of Germany, the Treaty of Versailles was only fair. Let's have a look at some reasons why it was unfair. One of the reasons, of course, is the harsh reparations, which crippled Germany's economy and led to the hyperinflation crisis of 1923. So harsh reparations, 6.6 billion. We also have war guilt. Some say it wasn't Germany's fault. War guilt. We also have only German disarmament. Other states were not forced to disarm, so only German disarmament. That was relatively unfair. They also removed the resources to pay reparations, so such as the Saarland. That was removed. That was given to the League of Nations. How are they going to pay reparations when their most major economic resources were actually removed? So removed major economic resources, such as Saarland, which was a producer of coal, and that had to go straight to France. So remove major economic resources. How are they going to pay reparations without their economic resources? Removal of all colonies to the British, to many other empires. So removal of all colonies was unfair. That was another thing that was unfair about Versailles. Self-determination did not apply to Germans. Self-determination did not apply to Germans. So all those parts of Germany which were annexed by other nations, the League of Nations, those Germans did not get self-determination. Not applied to Germany. To some Germans. The diktats. So the diktats, Germany was not given a choice over whether or not to sign the treaty. So no choice. They were forced to sign the treaty or else. Another reason is the leaders of Germany were not punished. So the leaders not punished. Alright, so the leaders were not punished. Alright, so that's all for the Treaty of Versailles so far. So